There we go. There we go. Got one on the clobber minnow. Little tiny bait, guys. It's actually a crappie bait, but got this little guy. There's bigger ones out there for sure, but hey, found some bait, found some bass. Forward facing sonared it up.
We're talking forward facing sonar in today's video, and we're talking about baits that I can't live without when it comes to fishing forward facing sonar. I've been using the Humminbird Mega Live, and I had Garmin Panoptics a long time ago. And I've caught a ton of fish on forward facing sonar, and it's something, whether you like it or love it, if you fish tournaments or you're just a hardcore bass fisherman, it's basically something that you have to learn how to fish and you have to utilize, or you're behind the curve. I want to go into 3 baits that I can't live without when it comes to fishing forward facing sonar. And it's gonna be mostly jig head minnow style plastics that we're gonna be talking about in today's video. There's obviously different ways to fish, like a jerk bait, drop shot, Ned rig, different stuff like that for forward facing sonar. And you can actually utilize forward facing sonar for a lot of different traditional techniques as well, but that's not what we're going to get into in this video. So we're gonna be talking about some 6th Sense plastics. I am affiliated with 6th Sense, and I can provide you with a discount code. So if you want to get anything after watching this video, go to the website, 6thsensefishing.com, and use my discount code. It's Luna10. It'll save you 10% off. It's kind of a win-win for everybody that way. You get to try some new stuff out, and you're getting it at a discount. So the first bait that I'm going to talk about when it comes to fishing forward-facing sonar is going to be the 6th Sense Juggle Minnow. The 6th Sense Juggle Minnow is a pretty do-nothing style bait, but it catches a ton of fish. I fish this not only on the jig head minnow, but I also fish it on a chatterbait. It gives the chatterbait a ton of action too. You could throw this on a drop shot. You could do a ton of different things with this little bait right here, but it has put a lot of fish in the boat. Now, if you're not familiar with the jig head minnow, it's basically a jig head, just like you guys have seen for years. This is a tungsten jig head. I like to use tungsten jig heads when it comes to forward facing sonar. The return on the tungsten head's a lot better than it is on a lead head. And all you do is just thread this thing on like you would any other swim bait or any other jig head for that matter. And you're gonna thread that thing on there, get it nice and straight. And this is what the profile is gonna be. And that's what you're throwing at these fish. And these fish think it's just a shad, a little minnow out there, and they can't resist it and they come and eat it. When it comes to picking colors for your juggle minnow, you basically want to try to match the hatch, so to speak. You want to match the forage that you have in your area. A couple of my favorite colors are the Sexified Shad color and the Ghost Minnow color. Those are very realistic color patterns for the forage that I have in my area. I've caught a lot of fish on both of those colors. If I'm gonna be using the juggle minnow on a chatterbait or something like that, then I'm just gonna match whatever I'm using. Whether if it's black and blue, I'm gonna put a black juggle minnow on there. If I'm using a green pumpkin chatterbait, green pumpkin juggle minnow. If I'm gonna be using a shad pattern chatterbait, then I'm gonna put a shad colored juggle minnow on there. So the next bait that I want to talk about is on those super tough days when they don't want to eat absolutely anything and you have to get about as small as you possibly can. And that's when the clobber minnow comes into play. This little clobber minnow is a tiny little bait fish imitation, and it was designed for crappie actually. This wasn't a specific bass bait. It was made for crappie, but it's this tiny little guy right here. Don't let the small size of this clobber minnow fool you. This thing will catch you big fish. I've seen lots of people catch some giant fish on this tiny little bait. In a lot of places, like here at home here in San Diego, the bait fish can get super tiny. So having something that can imitate that bait fish is super key. And there's not a ton of baits out on the market that actually get that small that aren't, you know, crappie specific and don't come in the right color patterns. Because a lot of times crappie baits are really bright, a lot of fluorescent, but this right here is like the Ghost Minnow color, which is super realistic, and it imitates the bait fish in my area, and I have a lot of clear water, so you want to get that color pattern as close as possible. Now, when I'm going to rig up the clobber minnow, you're going to have to downsize that jig head significantly. I have been able to put it on a jig head with a 2/0 hook, and it's a little bit wonky. I have caught fish on it, but I think if you can get a smaller shank hook on there, you're going to do a lot better, and it's going to give you the maximum amount of action that that bait's meant to produce. And that's when these 6th Sense crappie jig heads come into play. Now, you're going to have to, maybe use some trial and error, or downsize your line, or set your drag appropriately, because like I said, this is meant for crappie. That bait is meant for crappie. So you're going to need to downsize that jig head. You're going to need to downsize the shank of that hook. And a lot of times what that ends up meaning is that the wire on that hook is also going to be a little bit thin. There's nothing wrong with a thin wire hook. You're going to be able to get that hook penetrated in the fish's mouth a heck of a lot easier than you would with a thicker shank hook, one that won't bend out as easily. But when you're using something like this, you're definitely going to want to take that into consideration. Now, with this crappie jig head, I'm going to thread this on that clobber minnow just like I did the juggle minnow. You want to go right down the middle of the clobber minnow, and you're going to go almost to the end of that bait, come straight out the top, and you're just going to keep threading it on the head of this jig. So all said and done, this is what our little bait's going to look like. That little bait right there is going to get munched. The fish will eat that, big fish will eat that, and you're going to be able to put a lot of fish in the boat. This right here is going to mimic a ton of fish in my area, and I've already caught plenty of bass on this little tiny clobber minnow. It's definitely one that you need to have in your tackle box. If you're strictly a bass fisherman, I still think there's a time and place to have some of these in your tackle box, because you never know when you're gonna get to the lake and they're not wanting that bigger size bait. They don't want the 4-inch juggle minnow. They really want something super tiny. Maybe it's post-front conditions. Maybe the pressure is just intense and you have to downsize in order to get those fish to bite. And that's when this little tiny thing comes into play. Now, the final bait that I want to talk about is the 6th Sense Aussie. This bait right here is one that I haven't had enough time to put a lot of testing to. I'm convinced that this thing catches fish. I've seen a lot of people catch fish on it, watched a lot of videos where people are catching fish on it. I just haven't been able to put it to the test myself enough. That's why I didn't list this one earlier. I have a feeling that this one is gonna move up in my categories over time, but those other baits have been out longer and I've caught more fish. That's why I talked about them first. This 6th Sense Aussie was designed, I believe, in-house at 6th Sense by Casey Sobczak, the owner. And I know that the name of the bait comes after Ben Milliken's son. And this bait has a ton of oscillation, which is key when it comes to getting those fish to bite when you're targeting with the forward-facing sonar. Out of the package, here is the 6th Sense Aussie. This bait right here is an awesome bait. I think there's gonna be a lot of different techniques that you're gonna be able to use this bait for, other than forward-facing sonar. I think you're gonna be able to use this on a chatterbait as well. It has that good thick profile where sometimes you want a little bit of thickness when it comes to your chatterbait trailers, so that way it kind of keels everything out and kind of keeps that bait from having too much reaction in the water where it's blowing out. A couple other features I really like is there's a couple hook slots on there to make the plastic a little bit thinner for that hook to have to come through. But once again, all you're gonna do is just thread this thing on there just like you would a swim bait or anything else that you're rigging on a jig head. Go right down the middle, and keeping everything as straight as possible is the most important part here. You're gonna thread that thing on there just like so. So that's basically how you're gonna fish this bait most of the time. Tungsten jig head once again, and this flat tail is what separates it from a lot of different baits out of the market. For the chatterbait, at least specifically, that flatter tail is going to give it a little bit of different action. There is a bend, or a little bit of a thinner portion in the tail right here, so you're going to get a lot of action out of the tail. But what makes this bait so good on forward-facing sonar is the roll. It's going to roll back and forth as you're fishing it, and that roll is what so many people are looking for out of their forward facing sonar baits. A lot of people are convinced that the roll of this bait as it's going through the water, or any forward facing sonar bait for that matter, is what really triggers those fish to bite. It's not so much the tail, it's not so much the body style, it's that roll. You want the body style and the tail to mimic a shad, so that way there's some realism there, but everyone talks about the roll, and that roll going back to the boat right above that fish's head is what gets those fish to bite, and this 6th Sense Aussie was designed with that roll in mind. That right there are my 3 baits that I can't live without when it comes to forward-facing sonar. This video is all about forward-facing sonar, so I want to throw a couple other baits out there on this forward-facing sonar topic. One of my favorite baits to fish, on a drop shot especially, is the 6th Sense Electric Shiner in the Divine swim bait. This little swim bait has caught key fish for me in tournaments. Days where I can't fill out my limit, I'm able to rig this guy up on a drop shot, cast it out there, and catch fish to fill out my limit. It's also great when you really need to finesse them on a swim bait where you're just throwing it out on a ball head similar to a forward-facing sonar style. You can just cast and wind it back, but you can drop shot this on fish that you see on your forward-facing sonar. A lot of times smallmouth especially will come up and see it, and then they come back down, and then they actually eat that bait. Another one that's really great for this as well is the party minnow. Very similar shape. The plastic's a little bit thinner in the tail, so you get a little bit more tail action out of the party minnow, and it has an eye on it, which gives it a little bit more realism. So sticking with that drop shot in mind, we're going to be talking about the 6th Sense glitch worm. This is a 3.8-inch worm, and it's caught a lot of fish for me at home and at some of the desert lakes, catching some smallmouth. I think this design was designed more to mimic some of those smallmouth, maybe to mimic a sculpin for the Great Lakes fishing, but a nice little profile on it. Small little bait, gonna imitate a goby as well, really well. This is one of my favorite colors. This one is the goby color, and anywhere this is super natural. It can mimic a worm. It can also mimic those gobies. There's a ton of different color options when it comes to the glitch worm, but this one, when the fishing gets tough and you got to fish that drop shot, whether it's forward-facing sonar or blind casting, a glitch worm is gonna get some bites, that's for sure. So last but certainly not least, when it comes to forward-facing sonar, is a jerkbait. My favorite jerkbait to throw is the 6th Sense Provoke Deep Diver. Whether it's in the 106 or the 97, it just depends on the conditions that I'm fishing. This one is the 106 silent version in the Milliken Ghost color. The Milliken Ghost color is a perfect cold water, clear water bait. It's got a blue top with translucent body and super sharp hooks right out of the package. I like the deep divers the most because most of the areas where I fish, these fish like to be a little bit deep, so sometimes the more typical shallower running jerkbaits don't get deep enough. So having that little bit extra, just a couple feet, can make a big difference, especially when those fish are a little bit lethargic. They don't want to come up very fast. Having that bait down a little bit deeper, pausing it for a little bit longer, can really increase the amount of bites that you get. This is also a bait that's great on forward-facing sonar. You can see some of those fish, cast that jerkbait out, and kind of work it back to the boat, and you're going to be able to kind of see how those fish react depending on whether they want it fast, whether they want it slow, whether they want it paused. Every fish is different, so you kind of have to play with those cadences, especially when you're able to see the reaction of those fish on your forward-facing sonar. You can cast it out there, you'll see those fish come up, or they don't. Maybe you have the wrong color, maybe you're not getting it deep enough, maybe it's not shallow enough. That's when you start kind of playing around, experimenting, and finding out what those fish actually want. When you have the forward-facing sonar, it is a way to kind of figure out what those fish want, and you can see the reaction in real time. Well guys, there you have it. Those are 3 baits for forward-facing sonar when it comes to the jig head minnow that I can't live without. I think that if you get those and add them to your arsenal, it's gonna help you catch a bunch more fish as well. And don't sleep on these baits if you don't have forward-facing sonar either. You're gonna be able to fan cast these around, work them on the bottom, and catch a bunch of fish as well. You can do different things with the Aussie, with the juggle minnow, pretty much all of them. You're gonna be able to drop shot and blind cast with them as well. Head over to the 6th Sense Fishing website, check them out for yourself. Make sure to use discount code LUNA10 so that way you can save some money. And if you wanna see me catching some fish on forward-facing sonar, make sure to click on the video that's on the screen right now, and I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.